I first realized something was wrong when my water pressure dropped halfway through a shower. At first, I thought my pump was failing again. It's an old submersible, the kind that hums like a tired old mule whenever it starts. But when I stepped out, dripping and annoyed, I noticed the gauge on my well control box was still reading steady pressure. That was impossible. The pump was working fine, but the water flow was low. It didn't make sense, unless someone else was drawing from my line. I live just outside the city limits, in one of those semi-rural neighborhoods where people have just enough land to pretend they're not in an HOA, until someone like Mrs. Cummings gets elected president and decides to make it her personal kingdom. The Maple Crest Association was supposed to handle road maintenance and common landscaping, but ever since she got control, she'd been adding community improvement initiatives that seemed suspiciously close to her own property. The well sits on my lot, a deep, hand-dug investment I installed 5 years ago when the county water connection kept failing. My neighbors laughed at the time. "Why spend 10 grand when city water's fine?" they said. But every drought, every burst pipe, every boil advisory made that decision more and more satisfying. Until now. The first clue was subtle. The grass on the HOA's community greenbelt had suddenly turned lush, deep green, and perfectly hydrated, despite the water restrictions the HOA itself had emailed everyone about. They had sent me a warning, actually, for excessive outdoor water use. That's when I started connecting the dot. My hose hadn't been used in a week. My well water had dropped pressure. The HOA was suddenly bragging about sustainable irrigation solutions. I could smell the hypocrisy from across the cul-de-sac. I walked the perimeter that night with a flashlight. The well line ran under my back fence and down to the curb, but about 30 feet from the control box, I noticed a patch of disturbed soil near the HOA's decorative hedge. Fresh dirt, not even tamped properly. Someone had dug there recently. I dug too. Bingo. A brand new PVC coupling with an offshoot, a line running directly toward the HOA's sprinkler box. They had literally tapped into my private water line. The nerve. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was fascination. Who does that? Who looks at a neighbor's well and thinks, yeah, I'll just connect that to our irrigation system? The next morning, I took pictures and measurements. The T-joint was clearly new, probably installed by their maintenance contractor. I sent an email to the HOA board. Hey, looks like someone connected to my private well. Could you clarify if there's a community agreement I missed? An hour later, I got a reply from Mrs. Cummings herself. Dear Mr. Hale, thank you for your message. The HOA recently implemented a shared resource initiative for sustainability purposes. As your well is located on HOA-managed soil, per Article 4, easements, it qualifies as a community water source. Your cooperation is appreciated. That's when I laughed out loud. Community water source? That well was fully funded, installed, and maintained by me. I owned the pump, paid the electric, and paid for the drilling. I checked my deed that afternoon. There were no easements for utilities, and certainly none granting the HOA any rights to my water supply. I wrote back, there's no such easement on file. The HOA does not have access to or ownership of my well. Please remove the unauthorized connection within 48 hours. Her reply came almost immediately. The board voted unanimously to retain the connection. If you have concerns, you may attend the next HOA meeting. Classic. Bureaucratic bullying hidden behind policy. But I knew better than to argue through email. So I decided to play along. If they wanted water, they could have it on my terms. That evening, I visited the hardware store and picked up a few fittings. A brass gate valve, a small lockable handle, and a cheap pressure gauge. I installed them right on the branch line before their connection point, neatly boxed it, and ran a padlock through the handle. From now on, I could control whether the HOA's water flowed or not. 2 days later, Mrs. Cummings showed up at my door. She was the type of woman who wore power like perfume, strong, overapplied, and impossible to ignore. She had that practiced HOA smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Hale," she said, "the landscapers reported an issue with the irrigation pressure. I assume you've tampered with something." I smiled. "You mean my private well line that your contractor illegally tapped?" "Yes, I installed a shut-off valve. It's on my property." Her smile tightened. "The board has rights to manage common systems. You're in violation of the Community Maintenance Covenant." "Funny," I said, holding up the printed deed, "because this land isn't common. It's mine. The only thing you're managing is theft." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The HOA's reputation depends on our appearance. Brown grass lowers property values. We're simply maintaining community standards." There it was, the motive. Control. She didn't want my water. She wanted her neighborhood to look perfect, and anyone in the way was a threat to her little empire. I shrugged. "Then pay for the water." Her eyes flashed. "We're not paying for something that should be shared." "Then I guess you're not watering." That night, I shut the valve completely. By the next morning, the HOA's lush greenbelt looked thirsty. The sprinklers hissed dry air, and patches of grass started to yellow. Within 24 hours, Mrs. Cummings had sent an emergency community alert blaming temporary irrigation pump issues. Couldn't resist smirking when I read it. 3 days later, she called an emergency HOA meeting regarding noncompliance with community resource policies. I went, of course. About a dozen neighbors gathered in the clubhouse, sipping free lemonade, waiting for the show. Mrs. Cummings started with her usual formal tone. "We have encountered deliberate obstruction of shared infrastructure by one resident, which may result in fines and legal action." I raised my hand. "You mean the illegal water theft from my property?" A murmur spread through the room. People looked confused. Most didn't even know the water came from my well. Mrs. Cummings cleared her throat. "The system is for communal benefit. Your well is on association soil." "Actually," I said, pulling up the survey map, "that's not true. The HOA boundary ends 2 feet short of my fence. You can verify it with the county." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wait, did the HOA really tap his well?" Another neighbor added, "Is that even legal?" Mrs. Cummings tried to regain control. "We have legal counsel reviewing." I interrupted. "Already did. County Code 37-204. Unauthorized utility connection is theft of service. I'll be filing a report tomorrow." That shut the room up. Even her vice president looked uneasy. She glared at me with a tight jaw, but she didn't say another word. The next morning, I received a letter slipped under my door, anonymous but obviously from her. It read, "If you proceed with legal action, the HOA will fine you for obstruction, noncompliance, and community disruption. Consider your neighbors before making things worse." So that was her next play, intimidation. But she underestimated how stubborn I could be. She wanted to weaponize bureaucracy? I could play that game better than she imagined, because while she was busy drafting threats, I was drafting something else entirely. A little plan that would give her the exact control she craved, only in a way she'd never forget. The county inspector showed up at my driveway 3 days later in a dust-coated pickup with a clipboard, an expression that said he'd already rather be somewhere else, and a badge that had seen more coffee stains than sunlight. His name tag read B. Garner, and when he asked if I was the one who'd reported utility interference, I told him yes and pointed toward the neat little junction box I'd left uncovered near the hedge. He crouched, whistled, and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." He followed the white PVC conduit to where it snaked under the HOA's sprinkler manifold, took a few photos, then stood, brushing off his knees. "This is not just a code violation. It's tampering. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." "I suspect the HOA," I said evenly. "They hired a landscaping crew last week. I found the joint 2 days later." He nodded, writing notes. "They'd need your consent for a shared connection like this. Did you sign any easement?" "None," I said. In fact, I have emails from their president claiming my well is a community resource. That made him snort. Yeah, that won't hold. I'll file the report today. Expect a follow-up. Mrs. Cummings was standing across the street, arms folded, watching. She didn't even try to hide it. When the inspector's truck pulled away, she marched right over. That was unnecessary, she said, her tone syrupy and sharp. You've embarrassed the board. I didn't embarrass anyone, I replied. You tapped a private well. She sighed, shaking her head. You're making this into a conflict. We could have handled this quietly. I tried quietly. You ignored me. She leaned closer. If you want to live here peacefully, I'd suggest you stop escalating. Nobody wants to see this go legal. I almost laughed at the irony. Then stop stealing my water. Her lips tightened into a straight line. She turned and left without another word. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammering. Out front, 2 men in safety vests were installing a bright orange Community Work Zone sign near the curb. Behind them, a trenching machine was chewing a line down the street. I stepped out. What's this? I called. One of the workers looked up. New irrigation loop, sir. HOA work order. Using whose water? I asked. He shrugged. We're just following the plan. The pipe they were laying ran right past my property and reconnected to the same lateral I'd locked. I realized instantly what she was doing, building redundancy. If I blocked one line, she'd just make another. I called Garner again. He was polite but slow. These things take time, he said. I filed the report, but it needs to go through utilities enforcement. Time was exactly what she was counting on. Within days, the new system was buried and sprinklers were humming again. I tested my pump pressure. It was still fine, but the gauge dipped every time their timers ran. They'd retapped the well downstream of my valve. I was furious, but fury doesn't win wars. It just burns resources. So I decided to think like her. Bureaucracy, rules, optics. That was her game. I spent a weekend in my garage drafting letters. To the County Water Authority, the Utility Commission, and even the State Environmental Agency. Every letter was polite, factual, and copied with timestamps, maps, and photos. By Monday, I'd mailed the whole packet certified. That same evening, the HOA sent a community-wide email. Urgent notice. Mr. Hale has filed unfounded complaints that may increase HOA dues due to legal fees. We encourage residents to express disapproval respectfully. I stared at it, amazed. She was turning the neighborhood against me. Sure enough, the next day 2 neighbors approached while I was trimming hedges. Hey, one said awkwardly, why were you fighting the HOA? The sprinklers keep the entrance nice. It's my water, I said. He frowned. It's just water, man. You've got plenty. That's when I realized her genius wasn't in stealing, it was in spinning. She made herself the protector of the community and me the selfish holdout. So I shifted strategies. The next evening, I waited until their sprinkler cycle started, then watched the pressure gauge dip. I followed the sound to the HOA control box, lifted the cover, and found the line they'd buried. Same material, same hack job fitting, feeding off my main well circuit. Instead of cutting it, I installed something new, a brass check valve backward. It would allow water to flow out, for about 10 seconds, before the pressure equalized and the flow stopped entirely. To anyone watching, it would look like a malfunction. At dawn, I heard the sprinklers sputtering. 10 seconds of mist, then silence. By noon, my phone pinged with a message from Mrs. Cummings. Our irrigation system appears faulty again. We'll need access to inspect the shared supply. Shared, I replied. You mean stolen? No response. That evening, 2 HOA officers knocked on my door with clipboards and polite smiles. We're here for a property inspection regarding community infrastructure. Not without a warrant, I said, and closed the door. By the next morning, a bright yellow violation notice was taped to my mailbox. Noncompliance with HOA cooperation policies, $2.50 fine. I laughed. Then I went to the county courthouse. Garner's report had gone through. They'd referred it to the local water rights office. The clerk there, a bored woman named Denise, raised an eyebrow as she flipped through the file. They really did this without your permission? Yes. She smirked. That's theft of a resource. They're in trouble. Want a copy of the violation notice? I nodded. She printed two. When I got home, I taped one right next to their sprinkler box. The other I mailed to Mrs. Cummings. 2 days later, the HOA sent another email blast. This time panicked. Due to unforeseen issues, community irrigation is temporarily suspended. Neighbors grumbled. The grass browned. And Mrs. Cummings? She doubled down. The next week, she called a mandatory neighborhood cleanup and had a water truck parked near the greenbelt, filling tanks directly from a hydrant. Probably an expensive rental, but she needed to prove she was still in control. That night, I sat on my porch, watching her supervise workers under portable lights. It was almost theatrical. The way she gestured, barked orders, micromanaged every hose connection. She caught my eye once and smiled smugly, as if to say, "See? I win anyway." But control has a price. The next morning, a county utilities vehicle pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out and walked straight to the truck. They clipped a citation under its wiper, then walked up to her house. Someone had reported unauthorized hydrant access. It wasn't me this time. Apparently, one of the workers had spilled water across a neighbor's driveway, flooding a garden. The neighbor called the county hotline. When I saw the ticket, $5,000 fine, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. By week's end, the HOA's tone changed. I got another letter, this time on fancy stationery. Dear Mr. Hale, the HOA proposes a formal agreement to share well resources at a reasonable compensation rate. Progress, finally. But I wasn't ready to settle yet. I wanted accountability, not compromise. So I countered with a contract drafted by a lawyer friend. Monthly rent for the water, written acknowledgement of prior unauthorized use, and reimbursement for my electricity costs. They never signed. Instead, the sprinklers went dead for good. I thought it was over until one night around 2 a.m., I heard my pump switch click on. I checked the gauge, pressure dropping again. Someone was using water. I grabbed a flashlight and walked the yard. The HOA line was dry, locked, sealed. Then I saw it, a small hose snaking from behind my shed toward the fence. Someone had installed another tap, this time hidden underground, running directly from my auxiliary line. It wasn't the landscaper's. This was personal. I followed it quietly, and sure enough, the line disappeared right under Mrs. Cummings' backyard. She wasn't done. She'd escalated again. I turned off the main breaker, disconnected the pump, and smiled to myself in the moonlight. She wanted to play Water Wars? I'd give her one, with engineering precision. Because the next step wouldn't involve shutting water off. No, the next step would let her have exactly what she wanted, only not the way she imagined. The valve was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, sketching flow diagrams of my plumbing system like it was a military blueprint. Every line, every fitting, every possible leak point. Mrs. Cummings had turned a private water source into her personal power trip, and every time I blocked one path, she dug another. So I decided to build something she couldn't outsmart, a solution so quietly devastating it would teach her a lesson without me ever lifting a shovel again. The next morning, I visited a hardware store 2 towns over. The kind of place that sells to farmers, not homeowners. I bought a high-pressure gate valve, a one-way check valve, and, crucially, a 60 psi backflow regulator with a manual bypass lever. To anyone else, it looked like plumbing parts. To me, it was justice in PVC form. My plan was simple. Install a concealed line behind my shed that could reverse the flow, sending air instead of water back into any connected pipe when I opened it. By mid-afternoon, the system was live. It wasn't illegal, Everything stayed on my side of the property line. But it meant that whenever someone tried to draw water from the new hidden tap, she'd run to her backyard. They'd get exactly what they asked for: a sudden gust of dusty, dry air that rattled the pipes and spat mud instead of water. The first time it happened was that same evening. I was on my porch, drinking coffee, when I heard the faint, hollow groan of her sprinkler system sputtering across the cul-de-sac. The pattern was unmistakable: choke, cough, pause, hiss. She'd triggered the pump through her secret line, and my system had replied with a firm no. 5 minutes later, I heard the familiar slam of her front door and saw the beam of a flashlight darting across her yard. She crouched near the sprinkler manifold, muttering, probably assuming it was another clog. I had to fight to keep a straight face. By morning, the HOA had another announcement ready. Due to unforeseen airlock issues, irrigation remains offline pending inspection. I nearly spit out my coffee. Airlock issues. That's one way to put it. But my satisfaction was short-lived. A few days later, I woke up to a new problem. My pump breaker had tripped overnight. When I checked the control box, I found the electrical conduit to the pump had been tampered with. Fresh tool marks on the panel screws, insulation stripped on one side. Whoever had done it wasn't subtle. That was the moment it stopped being funny. I realized I was up against someone who didn't just bend rules. She broke them when her power was threatened. I replaced the wiring and installed a small battery-powered camera inside the control box, hidden beneath a layer of dust and a fake spider web for camouflage. 2 nights later, it caught exactly what I expected: Mrs. Cummings herself, in a windbreaker and gardening gloves, unscrewing the panel at 1:12 a.m. She glanced around, holding a flashlight under her chin like a villain in a campfire story. The video was grainy but clear enough to recognize her pearl earrings. The next morning, I didn't go to the HOA or the police. Not yet. Instead, I printed a still frame from the video and taped it to her mailbox with a note: tampering with private utilities is a felony. Next time, I won't just take pictures. By noon, the photo was gone. By evening, I got an email. Mr. Hale, your recent behavior constitutes harassment. The HOA has retained counsel. Remove any unauthorized surveillance immediately or face legal action. Sincerely, President Cummings. She was cornered and she knew it. I ignored the email. The following day, her husband, a quiet man I'd barely spoken to, showed up at my door holding 2 coffees. He looked embarrassed, like a man paying for someone else's mistake. "Look," he said, "I'm not here to fight. Can we just figure this out? My wife's under a lot of stress." "I'm not unreasonable," I said. She tapped into my well twice. "I'm asking for reimbursement and a written agreement that it won't happen again." He nodded slowly. "That sounds fair. I'll talk to her." But he didn't get the chance. That evening, as I came home from work, I saw a fresh banner at the community entrance. Special assessment, $200 per household for legal fees. She was making everyone pay for her mistake. That night, someone egged my truck. I found the shells in the driveway, half-dried, dripping yolk under the moonlight. I didn't need to guess who sent them. The petty war had gone public. I decided to raise the stakes quietly. I called Garner, the county inspector, and asked if his report had gone through. He sighed. "Yeah, but the HOA's appealing. They claim you agreed verbally." "Can I get a copy of their filing?" I asked. He chuckled. "Sure, but you'll want to see what they attached. They included photos of your yard, claiming the well sits on common ground." Photos? That was interesting. I hadn't seen anyone taking them. Then I remembered the small drone that had buzzed over my fence a week earlier, hovering low for 30 seconds before zipping off. I'd assumed it was a kid's toy. Apparently, it was evidence gathering. That night, I borrowed a friend's drone and flew it in reverse. Up, over, and down into Mrs. Cummings' backyard. I wasn't spying on her personally. I was documenting the illegal plumbing line she'd buried there. I snapped high-res shots, then zoomed out wide enough to show her patio and my fence in one clean frame. It was irrefutable proof of encroachment. When I sent the pictures to the county with a polite note, "Please find attached updated documentation of unauthorized water connection," things moved fast. By Friday, an enforcement officer showed up with a citation notice. The HOA was fined $7,500 for tampering with private utilities. Word spread fast across Maple Crest. Suddenly, the same neighbors who'd called me selfish were whispering about the HOA's mismanagement. The meeting that week was chaos. Half the residents wanted her to step down. I didn't attend, but I heard the yelling from my porch. That same night, around 11:30, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the pump camera. I opened the feed and saw movement near the control box again. But this time, it wasn't Mrs. Cummings. It was her husband. He opened the panel, stared at the wires for a moment, then closed it gently and just stood there, shoulders slumped. It wasn't sabotage. It looked like guilt. I went outside quietly and caught his attention. He froze. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I'm not calling anyone. Just tell her it ends tonight." He nodded, then walked back home slowly, like a man dragging a chain. For a few days things were calm. The sprinklers stayed silent, no fines appeared, no letters in my mailbox. I thought maybe she'd finally accepted defeat. Then the rain started. A 3-day downpour that turned lawns into puddles. On the 4th morning, I went to check my control box, and found the door wide open, the inside flooded, wires rusting in an inch of muddy water. The pump was fried. A deliberate sabotage disguised as storm damage. This time, I didn't get angry. I got efficient. I drained the box, replaced the pump relay, and installed a new control system, one with a Bluetooth valve monitor. Every time water flowed, I'd get a notification. And more importantly, I added one final touch. A pressure-regulated relief pipe that diverted excess output into a sealed drum filled with dye. The next time someone connected a new tap to my well, they'd end up pumping bright blue water into their yard, visible from space. A week later, my phone pinged. Unusual outflow detected. I checked the log. Someone had drawn water at 2:46 a.m. I didn't even have to go outside to see it. The next morning, Mrs. Cummings' prized front lawn looked like a smurf crime scene, blue puddles everywhere, splashed up her porch, dripping from the sprinkler heads like a cartoon gone wrong. By sunrise, half the neighborhood had gathered to take photos. The story spread on the local Facebook group before she even woke up. When she did, she stormed outside, robe flapping, hair wild, screaming at the landscapers. The harder she yelled, the more obvious it became that she had no idea what had happened. That afternoon, I got another email, short, shaky, and written from what I assume was her husband's account. "Please remove whatever you've done. We'll pay for damages. Just stop." But it wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. She'd stolen, lied, vandalized, and bullied. The HOA system she built on control was collapsing under her own arrogance. Still, I wasn't cruel. I replied, "Turn off your illegal connection, and the water, and color, will stop." That night, the flow readings went dead. My system went quiet. I thought the war was over. But then I saw the new agenda posted for the next HOA meeting. Motion to revoke Mr. Hale's membership and initiate property lien for noncompliance. She hadn't given up. She was preparing for the final strike. And I was ready to deliver mine. The agenda hit the neighborhood chat like a thunderclap. Motion to revoke Mr. Hale's membership. It was pure Mrs. Cummings. She couldn't win with logic, so she was going to rewrite the rules instead. Revoking my HOA membership meant declaring my property non-compliant, which would allow them to fine me until I either caved or sold. I'd seen her pull this tactic on a retired couple who built the wrong color fence. They sold within 6 months. I wasn't planning to sell. I was planning to end this. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the clubhouse. I spent the 3 days before it quietly collecting my ammunition. Every email, every picture of the illegal hookups, every invoice for my electric bills from the months they drained my well. I even printed the county's citation against the HOA and the photographs of her flooded control box with the blue-dyed puddles. When I was done, the folder was thick enough to make a satisfying thud when I dropped it on the table. I walked into that meeting wearing my calmest smile. The room was packed. Neighbors who'd once waved politely now whispered behind hands. Mrs. Cummings sat at the head of the table, gavel ready, a half-circle of board members flanking her like disciples. She started with a performance. "This association thrives on order," she announced, tapping the gavel for silence. "But one resident has repeatedly disrupted our harmony, damaged community systems, and harassed board members." Then she gestured toward me. "Mr. Hale, do you have anything to say before the board votes?" I stood and let the silence stretch until she shifted in her seat. "Yes," I said finally. "I brought evidence." I opened the folder and began handing out copies like a teacher on test day. The first pages were the county's violation report. "As you'll see," I said evenly, "the HOA was fined $7,500 for unauthorized utility connections to my private well. These aren't allegations, they're county records." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the board members frowned. "We were told that was under appeal." "It was," I replied. "They lost the appeal yesterday." Mrs. Cummings slammed the gavel. "Irrelevant. The issue tonight is Mr. Hale's behavior." "The issue," I interrupted, "is theft. And vandalism. And intimidation." I slid another set of photos forward. Her at the control box at 1:12 a.m., flashlight in hand. "This is your HOA president tampering with private electrical equipment. I'd call that more disruptive than trimming my hedges out of regulation." Someone gasped. Another whispered, "That's her earrings." Mrs. Cummings' voice rose, brittle. "That's fabricated. He's manipulating images." "Funny," I said, "because the county inspector who took these photos is on the record." For a moment, the only sound was the ceiling fan ticking above us. Then one of the neighbors, Mr. Delaney, who usually stayed neutral, spoke up. "Linda, you told us he donated the water voluntarily." Her jaw clenched. "It was a community necessity. He refused to cooperate. I was acting for the greater good." There it was again, control disguised as benevolence. I looked around the room. If that's the greater good, then I guess lying, stealing, and trespassing are HOA values now. The vote never happened. Half the board walked out before she could call it. The remaining members tabled the motion, pending legal clarification. In HOA language, that meant dead. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I filed a small claims suit for reimbursement. $3,200 in electrical costs, $1,000 for pump repairs, and an additional $5,000 for property damage and harassment. It wasn't about the money, it was about making the record official. My lawyer friend helped me word it so the claim automatically became public record once filed. Within a week, it was online for anyone to see. The fallout was instant. The HOA group chat turned into open rebellion. Homeowners demanded an audit of association finances, questioning why their dues had been used to fight a losing legal battle over my well. Someone leaked that Mrs. Cummings had paid her consultant nephew $2,000 to draft fake easement map. By the weekend, the HOA vice president called an emergency meeting, this time without her. I didn't attend that one either. I didn't need to. By Monday morning, a notice was taped to the community mailbox. Effective immediately, Linda Cummings has resigned as HOA president. Interim leadership will be appointed. Peace finally. But as anyone who's ever dealt with a Karen knows, peace is never permanent. That evening, as the sun set, I saw her walking her dog past my driveway. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the venom in her silence. Her once proud posture was gone. Her steps were sharp and mechanical. I thought maybe she'd learned something. Then, 2 nights later, I received a letter, anonymous but obviously her handwriting. It was 1 sentence long. You may have one, but everyone will remember what you did. I almost laughed. What I did? I defended my property. But her words stuck with me because they carried a kind of truth. In a neighborhood like this, reputation is currency. She'd lost hers, but mine was tarnished too. Some people still thought I'd gone too far. I decided to fix that, not with talk, but with action. I spent the next weekend installing a new community water spigot at the edge of my property, fed from a separate tank, not my well. I posted a small sign, "Free water for gardens, no HOA permission needed." Within a week, people started using it. Kids filled buckets for car washes, gardeners filled cans. The tone of the neighborhood shifted. The same residents who'd once sided with her now waved again. One old man even brought me a pie for the community spirit. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was balance. But Mrs. Cummings couldn't stand being irrelevant. A month later, during a dry spell, I caught her standing by the spigot, inspecting it like a building inspector looking for violations. She noticed me watching and said, "You know, you still need HOA approval for public fixtures." "I checked," I said. "It's on my property. And it's not permanent, it's a hose." She sniffed. "You're mocking the rules." "I'm mocking hypocrisy," I replied. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she no longer had authority. She turned and walked away without another word. That should have been the end. Except 2 weeks later, a city truck rolled up unannounced. The driver said there'd been a report of unlicensed water distribution. Someone had filed a complaint, anonymously, of course. The inspector tested the water, confirmed it came from a private tank, and left shaking his head. "Perfectly legal," he said before leaving. But the stunt told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't giving up quietly. That's when I decided to end this saga permanently, not by fighting her, but by turning her weapon back on her. The HOA's bylaws allowed any resident to run for office during elections held every June. Normally, no one bothered. This year, I submitted my candidacy for president. My slogan, transparency, fairness, and fewer meetings. At first, people laughed. Then they remembered who had fought and won against the system everyone hated but tolerated. By the time the ballots were counted, it wasn't even close. I won with 83% of the vote. The first thing I did as president was simple. I rewrote the community charter to remove any clauses that allowed shared resource access without explicit consent. The second thing I did was install a new lock on my well control box, with a plaque above it that read, "Private property, respect boundaries." When I sent the new bylaws for state registration, I attached every document of the old battle as historical record. I wanted it preserved, not erased. People should know what happens when control turns into entitlement. At the next meeting, Mrs. Cummings attended quietly, sitting in the back. I made sure to thank her by name for reminding us of the importance of boundaries. She didn't look up, but I could see her knuckles tighten around her notepad. After the meeting, she approached me outside. "Enjoy your little victory," she said. "It won't last." "Neither did yours," I replied. She glared at me for a moment, then smiled faintly, the kind of brittle smile that cracks just before it breaks. "You're worse than I ever was," she said, and walked away. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I just learned to play her game better. Either way, the well stayed locked, the lawn stayed brown, and for the first time in a year, Maple Crest was quiet. But peace built on silence has a way of echoing back. Because sometimes, when I pass the control box at night and hear the faint hum of the pump, I swear I can still imagine her voice behind me saying, "We're all connected, Mr. Hale." And in a strange way, she's not wrong. We were connected, just not the way she intended. Being HOA president wasn't supposed to be satisfying. It was supposed to be ironic. A symbolic middle finger to the system that had spent a year trying to bury me. But after the election, I discovered something unexpected. Power, even the kind you never wanted, comes with temptations of its own. The first few weeks went smoothly. I cut meeting lengths in half, scrapped half the unnecessary beautification, fines, and published all HOA expenses online. Residents who'd spent years grumbling about hidden dues finally saw where their money went, and where it shouldn't have. I expected gratitude. Instead, I got whispers. People don't like seeing how ugly the books really are when the curtain's pulled back. That's when I found the file. It was buried in the HOA's shared drive, labeled Community Maintenance Reserve. Inside were invoices from years back, some signed by Mrs. Cummings herself. Landscaping fees that doubled in cost every other month, consultant payments to her nephew, and a mysterious $12,000 charge listed as water management infrastructure upgrade. I knew exactly what that was, the illegal connection to my well. The dates lined up perfectly. She'd billed the HOA for the theft, claiming it was an eco-friendly community project. Every homeowner had unknowingly paid for it. I stared at the spreadsheet for a long time before realizing what it meant. I'd been fighting her on principle, but this was fraud. And now I had proof. I called a special audit meeting and presented everything, calmly and methodically. When I finished, the room was silent. Finally, Mr. Delaney, the same quiet man who'd confronted her before, said what everyone was thinking. We should press charges. Part of me wanted that. It would be the perfect ending to her reign. But something in my gut twisted. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was fatigue. I just said, let's give her the chance to explain herself first. The board agreed, reluctantly. We scheduled a meeting and sent her a formal notice. She didn't respond. 3 days later, I heard she'd put her house up for sale. That should have been the final note in the saga, but life rarely sticks to neat endings. A week after the listing went up, I got a call from her husband. His voice was quiet, almost broken. She's gone, he said. Gone where? I asked. He hesitated. She left. Took the car, some clothes, her laptop. No note. I don't know where she went. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something heavier, harder to name. She'd built her identity around control, and when that crumbled, maybe she'd lost herself along with it. The news hit the neighborhood differently. Some people were sympathetic. Others called it karma. Me? I just felt tired. I had the victory I'd wanted, but it didn't feel like one. 2 weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper, handwritten, neat, deliberate. The first line read, "You finally understand what it takes to keep people in line." It was signed, Linda. No threats, no insults. Just that one line. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those words. Was she wrong? I'd taken control of the HOA to fix it, but I'd used the same tactics she had. Exposure, humiliation, rules as weapons. I told myself I'd done it for justice, but at some point, justice had turned into dominance. Over the next month, I caught myself enforcing things I used to hate. Reminders about lawn maintenance, parking violations, noise complaints. It wasn't out of malice. It was efficiency. But still, the line blurred. I'd become what I fought. It all came to a head one afternoon when I fined a new homeowner, a single mother named Evelyn, for leaving a plastic kiddie pool on her driveway. The bylaws technically prohibited temporary unsightly fixtures. I didn't even think about it. I just sent the notice automatically. That night, she came to my door, eyes red. "I moved here because it was supposed to be a nice community," she said quietly. "I didn't think it'd start like this." Her tone wasn't angry, it was disappointed. That hit harder than any insult. I looked at the crumpled notice in her hand and realized how ridiculous it was. A year ago, I'd have been her, standing on this porch, holding a paper written by someone like me. "I'll void it," I said. "Forget it happened." She nodded, still hurt, and left. After she was gone, I walked to the control box and stared at the old padlock. My reflection stared back from the shiny brass surface. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, the look of someone who'd won too many battles and forgotten the point. I thought about Mrs. Cummings, somewhere out there, maybe smiling at the irony. The next morning, I drafted a motion to dissolve the HOA entirely. No one believed I was serious at first. "You can't just end it," someone said. "We need it for property values." "Do you?" I asked. "Or do you just need someone to blame when your neighbor paints their door the wrong shade of beige?" The debate stretched for weeks. Some people fought me tooth and nail, others quietly supported it. Finally, the vote came down to a narrow margin, 15 in favor, 12 against. Just like that, Maple Crest Association ceased to exist. You'd think the moment would feel triumphant, but it didn't. It felt empty, like dismantling a machine you'd spent years fighting only to realize you were part of its gears. Still, I followed through. The funds were distributed back to residents, records archived, signs removed. I even hosted one last community barbecue in the park, the same patch of land that had once been watered by my stolen well. People came awkwardly at first, unsure how to act without an authority hovering over them. But by sunset, kids were chasing each other through the grass, neighbors were laughing over plates of ribs, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt human again. At the end of the night, Evelyn approached me with her son, a quiet 6-year-old holding a cup of lemonade. "You did good," she said. I smiled. "Let's hope it stays that way." She laughed. "No more presidents, no more bylaws. I think we'll survive." When everyone left, I walked alone to the well. The air was still. The moon reflected in the stainless steel pump cover like a mirror. For months it had been the center of conflict, greed, pride, and now it just sat there, silent and steady, like it had all along. I unlocked the valve, ran the pump, and filled a bucket. The water came out cold and clear, washing over my hand. I took a sip, let it settle, and realized it tasted exactly the same as the first day I'd dug it, untouched, unbothered, mine. I was about to head back when I heard footsteps. It was her husband. He looked older, thinner, eyes shadowed from too many sleepless nights. "She's not coming back," he said quietly. I figured. He looked at the well, then at me. "She wasn't always like that, you know." The HOA started small. Just neighbors trying to keep lawns tidy. Then people stopped listening unless she yelled. "I guess she forgot how to stop yelling." I nodded. "Happens to anyone with a microphone long enough." He smiled sadly. "She'd hate seeing this gone. But maybe it's better." He turned to leave, then paused. "She did love this place, in her own way. Maybe too much." After he left, I stood there for a while longer, watching the ripples in the bucket fade. The reflection smoothed out until it looked like a pane of glass, and for the first time, I saw the story clearly from both sides. She wanted control to feel secure. I wanted freedom to feel in control. Different motives, same sickness. When I finally walked back to the house, the sprinklers across the street kicked on. City water this time, not mine. Their steady rhythm sounded almost like applause. That night, I drafted one last letter, not to the neighbors, not to the county, but to her. I didn't know where she was, but I wrote it anyway. "Linda, the HOA's gone. The well's free. The lawns are still green. You were wrong about one thing. I didn't understand what it takes to keep people in line. I understand now why it isn't worth trying." I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and left it on the old community bulletin board. By morning, it was gone. Maybe she came back for it. Maybe the wind took it. Either way, I didn't need to know. Because for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to the people again, and the well, the water, and the quiet all finally belonged to me. 6 months after the HOA dissolved, Maple Crest felt almost like a small town again instead of a battleground. People waved when they passed, kids played soccer in the old greenbelt, and no one left anonymous notes about trash bins or paint colors. You could hear birds again instead of sprinklers. For a while, it felt perfect, too perfect, like calm after a storm that hadn't quite finished. Then one July morning, my phone buzzed with a call from the county office. "Mr. Hale? This is Utilities Enforcement. We're calling about your well permit renewal." We've received an application from another party claiming partial ownership. My stomach dropped. Another party? Who? Name on the application is Linda Cummings. I nearly laughed. That's impossible. She moved away months ago. Her listed address is the same parcel she sold. Application was filed online, notarized digitally. I hung up and sat in silence. She was back. Maybe not in person, but still playing the game. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse to see the filing myself. Sure enough, there it was. A notarized affidavit claiming shared infrastructural rights due to historic community use. It even cited the old, defunct HOA bylaws as supporting documentation. She had resurrected the ghost of Maple Crest's rulebook to reach through bureaucracy and grab at the well one last time. The clerk glanced at me sympathetically. "Don't worry," she said. "These filings don't hold up without deeds. But you might want to clear it officially." I thanked her, took a copy, and left. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that phrase, historic community use. It was almost poetic. In a way, she wasn't wrong. That water had once flowed through everyone's sprinklers, stolen or not. Maybe that's what haunted her, that even when she lost, she'd left her fingerprints on something that outlasted her. That night, I walked to the well. The air was warm, the kind of humid stillness that carries the smell of cut grass and ozone. I unlocked the control box and checked the gauge, steady as ever. The hum of the pump had become a kind of lullaby to me, a quiet assurance that I'd rebuilt peace. But looking at it now, I wondered if the peace I'd built was just control by another name. The next morning, the unexpected arrived. Not a letter, not a lawyer, but a storm. A real one. The forecast had warned of heavy rainfall, but this was biblical. By noon, the ditches overflowed. By evening, the whole lower end of the neighborhood was under 6 inches of water. My well, being downhill, took the brunt of it. The pit around the casing filled with muddy runoff, and when I checked the system, the motor whined but wouldn't catch. The breaker tripped again. I waded through knee-high water to disconnect it, the rain hitting like needles. My flashlight beam flickered over the control box, and that's when I saw her. No, not Linda herself, but her ghost in the form of a soggy cardboard box floating against the fence. Stenciled on the side in faded ink were the words, Maple Crest Association, Records. It must have washed out from somewhere. Maybe her old garage, maybe a storage unit. Curiosity won over exhaustion. I dragged it onto the porch, soaked and falling apart, and started sorting through the soggy mess. Inside were ledgers, meeting minutes, old memos, all the history of our little tyranny in paperwork form. One binder caught my eye. It was labeled, Well Project Proposal 2019. Inside were drafts of the plan I'd never seen, the one that started it all. The first page wasn't written by Linda, but by a man named Arthur Benson, the HOA president before her. His opening line stunned me. Proposal to establish a shared well system for long-term drought resilience, voluntarily managed by Mr. Hale as primary operator. Voluntarily. I read it twice. My signature wasn't on it, but attached was a scanned email from my address, an old one I'd abandoned years ago, saying, "Happy to support the community however I can." I sat back in disbelief. The date was months before Linda had even joined the board. Either someone had forged that email to justify the theft later, or somehow, at some point, I'd casually agreed to something I didn't remember. I couldn't sleep that night. The rain kept hammering the roof, and all I could think about was that possibility. Had this whole war started over a misunderstanding? By morning, the storm broke, and the world looked washed clean but fragile. My yard was a shallow pond, reflecting a bruised gray sky. I spent hours pumping water out of the well pit, hands numb, mind looping through every event of the past year, every escalation, every retaliation. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe the villain and the victim had swapped places more than once. 2 days later, I went to the county office again to withdraw the complaint against her false filing. The clerk looked surprised. "You sure?" You could have this dismissed permanently. I'm sure, I said. Let it sit. It doesn't matter anymore. That weekend, I did something unthinkable. I opened the valve connecting my system to the old, abandoned HOA irrigation main. Not to give them water. That pipe hadn't carried a drop in months. I just wanted to test the line, see if it still worked. I hooked up a secondary pump and flushed it out, watching the brown water clear, imagining how it used to sound when all the lawns hissed to life in unison. It wasn't nostalgia, it was understanding. That shared sound had been her power. My rebellion had been silence. Both had cost more than they gave. The following Monday, a moving truck pulled up 2 doors down. A woman in her late 40s stepped out, auburn hair tied back, the kind of brisk efficiency that comes from surviving more than a few storms of her own. I was trimming branches when she approached. "You must be Mr. Hale," she said. "I'm the new owner of the Cummings place." I nodded, careful. "Welcome to Maple Crest, or what's left of it." She smiled faintly. "Funny thing, you know who owned this before me? The agent said she left some things in the attic. Files, letters. Said if you wanted them, I could drop them off." "Sure," I said, though my chest tightened. She returned 10 minutes later with a dusty metal box and handed it over. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, all addressed to me, all unsent. Dozens of them. Some were short, just a sentence or two. Others were full pages, rambling about community, order, and fairness. They were her letters to me, the arguments she'd never had, the speeches she'd never given. One, dated 2 weeks before she vanished, read, "You think control is power, but it's just fear in a better suit. You'll learn that when you're the one everyone expects to fix things." I sat on the porch long after the new neighbor left, reading her words as the wind rustled the trees. She wasn't apologizing, not exactly. She was explaining herself in the only language she understood, rules and consequences. That evening, I took the letters, the old records, and the box, and I drove to the Greenbelt. The grass had grown tall where sprinklers once hissed. I dug a shallow hole near the big oak and buried it all. The bylaws, the minutes, the ghost of Maple Crest. I tamped the soil flat, feeling like I was covering a grave. As I turned to leave, I noticed kids running through the field again, chasing a kite. Their laughter carried across the air, light and clean. None of them would ever know how absurdly hard we'd fought over this patch of land, this water, these imaginary lines. And that was the best outcome I could have asked for. When I got home, I poured a glass of water from the tap, cool, clear, steady. I raised it toward the window where the sunset spilled gold across the yard. "To peace," I murmured. Then, after a pause, "and to boundaries." The well hummed softly in the distance, indifferent and eternal, pulling from the same underground river it always had. Maybe that was the real lesson. No matter how much we fight over what's ours, the water never really belongs to anyone. We just borrow it until we learn not to poison it with greed or pride or power. The next morning, the county finally sent the official notice. Ownership dispute resolved. Well, rights remain solely in your name. I pinned it to the wall beside the old plaque. Private property, respect boundaries. For the first time, those words didn't feel like a warning. They felt like balance. And as the sun rose over Maple Crest, now just another nameless neighborhood with no board, no bylaws, and no enemies, I realized that peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the moment you stopped needing to win.